All right, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for attending and wanting to learn something new. I'm really excited to start this presentation today because we do have a special guest. But first off, we're going to be talking about recovery. It goes both ways. So not only are we going to be talking about being someone who is recovering from active addiction, but also recovery in a lot of different ways, such as mental health disorders, being a family member in recovery, and things like that. So thank you for being here. So first thing, who are we? Hello, I'm sure you all know me. I am Ruth Del Pino. I'm a prevention educator from the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I'm the Mercer County coordinator of the Mercer County Grant Program coordinator. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, Political Science, and American Studies. I'm certified in teaching English as a foreign language, life skills training, and leadership. And as a side note, just in case you are seeing future presentations, I am being shifted to another part of Mercer Council. So you'll see me again, but I'll just have a different title. So next we have is Adrian. Oh, Adrian, yeah, unmute. So like, I think
There we go.
it is
Okay.
always
All
like,
right.
it's the thing of 2021. All right.
Yes. I'm Adrian Petta. I'm a National Certified Peer Recovery Support Specialist. I work for Mercer Council as well for the Opioid Overdose Recovery Program. Also on the Hamilton Alliance Against Substance Abuse, our local alliance. I've had the opportunity of speaking at a lot of different summits and conferences. I was blessed to do a commercial for Reach NJ, and I've even had my story shared at the House of Representatives, our US Congress. So all good recovery stuff.
Awesome stuff. And especially because, I mean, we're going to be talking about it later, but like using your recovery in a way that just makes other people's lives better is just such a great part of what we do. First off, I always want to start a baseline with why this presentation, because there are a lot of different areas of this presentation that we need to talk about. First thing is, this is not to scare you. This is to inform you. This is also not to parenting class. You are the best parent for your child. You know them the best. You've probably known them longer than they've known themselves. The other thing is that this is also just not a parenting class. This is for anyone that works with youth and just being informed on how youth are affected in today's world. My perspective is shaped by my approach and my learning experiences, meaning as a prevention educator, I get to go around, learn the best things about the things in my fields, to attend trainings, attend webinars, all that stuff, but also understand that because of that, all of that knowledge that I gain, I will try and bring back to my presentations. And some things I will actually have to pick out and highlight for us for the presentation. So if you have any questions about anything that I'm doing or saying, I don't know, I don't necessarily agree with that, or I would like to know more about it, I always put the resources in the presentation once this is uploaded onto YouTube, just in case you have any questions about anything. And obviously you can reach out to me anytime. This is also evidence informed and some evidence-based, meaning I take information, I put it in the presentation, and then evidence-based in that I use the basis for all of our evidence-based programs, such as Too Good for Drugs, life skills training, footprints, things like that. Parents Who Host is another one. So I use all of that, and I also use it to inform the formats of my presentations. Now, I'm going to be presenting with Adrian today, and we're really excited to get started. So first thing is we're going to be talking about recovery. So what does recovery look like? Recovery can mean a lot of things. It does look like a lot of things. But essentially, when we are talking about recovery, it's defined as, and I have two definitions here, but I want to sort of round out the definition of this of recovery, because it doesn't necessarily always mean one thing. And recovery is defined as the action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. And I think that what we can look at this here and to understand it the best is to realize that recovery in its own right, it does say some getting control of something stolen or lost. But when we're talking about things in general, when we're talking about children and the way that they interact with recovery, it's meaning that it's going back to something that is not necessarily your normal. It's just the thing that you can have after, and that you are entitled to after you go through something really hard. Now, recovery also means that the thing that you went through, the hard thing that you went through is something that is difficult. The active addiction, the mental health disorder, being a family member in recovery, all those sorts of things are what you need to be to recover from in order to be the best version of yourself. Now, recovery from drug use can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean looking normal. It doesn't necessarily mean being the same person. Recovery from drug use can mean by a parent, from a parent. It can also mean by a child and from a child. So we're going to be talking about drug use today, but recovery does mean a lot of different things. Now, drug use in a parent can look very different from when it's a child, because the parent is the authority figure in that situation, and the child is the person who is being influenced by all of those around them. Also, we're kind of wondering about whether or not recovery is linear. And what we mean by this is that linear means going from point A to point B. And I know that there's been, especially when you're driving, when you have the GPS say, take a left turn here, take a right turn there. Those are the sorts of things that exist on a level of things we can completely control. We are the driver in that situation, absolutely. But when it comes to recovery, there are so many different aspects to life, right? So we may have our lives, but we have so many other parts of every other life too, especially when we're talking about families. And when we talk about something being linear or something being progressive, we just want to talk about recovery being a progress, not necessarily something that leads to a point A to point B situation. And also to understand that there are many points of intervention when it comes to recovery. And when we are talking about the points of recovery in this situation, or the points of intervention in general, we are talking about saying, all right, you may have gone from 1 to 100 steps, right? And 3 years from now, you're at the 50th step you were 5 years ago, So it's the point is that when we have life happen, recovery is around that. It's a choice that people make every day, and they try to live with that choice every day. I do want to talk about quickly being a family member in recovery, because this wasn't actually something, a language that I had used in general when I had first started my journey when I was doing these presentations, because of something that it just sort of wasn't a thing that I was given the words for. And I had actually done a presentation with Vanessa Peters, who is here right now, and Rocky Schwartz from the Jersey Prevention Network. They were in the Central Jersey part for that. They're called Sharing the Hope, and they are a great family advocates resource. So I'm actually gonna give their information at the end of this presentation as well. But essentially, Rocky had pointed out that there's a term called family member in recovery. And what we talk about this is that it's not just the person that yeah, of course. It's not just the person that the the person in active addiction is in recovery. It's every part of that person, or of those people that have interacted with this person, are in recovery as well. Because it's not just about this person getting help, it's everyone being influenced by what happened to them due to that person's actions, or due to the lack of that person's actions in active addiction. So that is something to keep in mind as we move forward, and for us to understand, so that there is no discrepancy there. So we're going to be talking also about leveling up. Toolkits are something that I sort of wanted to keep in mind as we move forward, because I see that there's a little, we want to erase that. My apologies. I don't know how that red ended up there. All right, so we're talking about leveling up here, and we're talking about toolkits. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever played a video game. I'm sure everyone here can attest that they have played video games before. But when we're talking about leveling up here, and we're talking about gaining experience, that's essentially what it is. So let's say you are 6 years old and you have a parent who is in active addiction. That is something that you should not have to face, but it's a reality that people do face. And it is sort of saying that you have learned, due to many different areas, that you know what that is, or that you know how to interact with this. You've played the game, you've learned the tools, you've gained experience. And these are the toolkits that children may have been forced to have, where they may have said, all right, I'm going to prioritize my safety or, my sibling's safety over this, or I'm going to not go to school because of XYZ reasons. And now, while we're talking about this as well, a toolkit really is just a set of skills. And we want to sort of talk about this in that resilience is something that we want to define when we're talking about toolkits and leveling up. I don't think that people have to level up in their lives in order to do good things, but more about the concept is gaining toolkits and then using that in other experiences. Now, when we sort of talk about this too, it's that children, when they have these toolkits and when they have things that are hard for them, it is that they have resilience in that aspect and they use that. But the thing is that children do not have the experience to know that these toolkits cannot be applied across the board. Now, we're going to get more into that later. Adrian does have some stories about that, so we'll be getting into that a little bit later. But when we're defining resilience, I've heard a lot of different things about resilience, and this is just my own personal opinion on this. There's no empirical evidence behind this statement, but resilience is just surviving the thing that tried to hurt you. And I think that a lot of the time people see resilience as being grandiose in our recovery or being grandiose in the way that we recover in general. But that doesn't mean that the little things, the things that really could have hurt you didn't. And that is something to be celebrated. And I see that as resilience. And even when there are people in active addiction in their own right, they are resilient because that is the thing that got them through the hard stuff. And now we're going to talk about how we can replace that substance use with something else. And that's where recovery comes in. And that's where more resilience and learned resilience does come in. Also, I would say that resilience is not linear in that we have a set of toolkits that we use or a set of skills, and then we use it on something else. And that's not necessarily the case with everything. And the reason why we want to talk about resilience not being linear is because adverse childhood experiences sort of are funny things. And I've talked about ACEs in nauseam in other presentations, but when we're looking at this here, it's that children are given certain aspects of their life to experience, and it is beyond their control, period, full stop. Now, obviously, they can make decisions, but up until a certain point when they are defined as an adult, everything that they do is only a product of the things that happen to them. And being a child and giving that child control is a good part of mitigating those adverse childhood experiences. But I do want to just say that ACEs in general is about your brain being rewired. It's about having certain experiences that will affect you later on in life because your brain makes those connections. It connects those synapses and those neurological pathways to actually interact with something in a way that gives it that survival mode. Now, the other thing too is that when we are given a set of skills, especially in games are sort of about surviving, right? Or they're sort of about getting a task. I know that the best games that I play are about zombie invaders and, fast cars and things like that. And all in the name of surviving, all in the name of getting the task done at high stakes. And that is essentially what a person who has a brain that has a lot of ACEs has to deal with. And the reason why we say this and the reason why it is claimed and empirically founded is that when you have those pathways there, it actually does rewire the brain and it puts you into survival mode, meaning that there are so many different areas of life that you have to interact with that your brain is in constant survival mode for. Also, anybody that is here, obviously you are able to unmute yourself at any time and share any stories or any information you would like to share. This is not just a platform for me to give information away, but it is information that we can talk about with together. Also, what I do want to talk about too is that our brains, and especially children's brains, are developed in a way that is obviously different than an adult's brain because we're fully developed. But we want to talk about age appropriateness, in that when a person, besides this, I'm jumping a little bit forward, but when a person is in recovery, or when a child is just around a person in recovery, using age appropriate language, using age appropriate actions adds to their development, not subtracts it. But if you are talking to a child as if they are an adult and they should somehow understand what you are saying or understand what you are feeling, they do not have that lived experience to understand that. And that is something that many people who interact with children should keep in mind, just in case we do get frustrated with that. Well, why aren't you doing this math question right? Well, it's because they've never had to sit at a table before and work with math. This is the first time they're ever doing this in their lives. So understanding that everyone's firsts are not something that we should negate their experiences for. I also wanted to talk about a study very quickly that talked about brain development and the choice of words and how it actually changes the synapses in the brain. Now, this is a great video on it. But what I do want to say, and there was some founding here, I'm just showing you what this was. It was the World Economic Forum, a very formidable resource. They did a study that talked about, and look at that cute baby. They did a study that talked about the formation of someone's brain, and it was cognitive scientists at MIT, actually. And they were talking about back and forth conversations between a parent and a child. And I had used this study before, and I've talked about this before in my previous presentations, but it's so important to understand that the choice of words, the way that they talk to the children, are all parts of how brains developed. It actually talked about how the range of tests added to the development of that child's brain. It had a positive impact on that child's brain. And it's just giving them tools, giving them words to express themselves in that way. They had also found further in the study, and it was sort of it was a founding that they didn't necessarily mean to find, but it was something that they did find, was that the connotation and the way that someone says something also affects child's brains. Now, if you are yelling at that child, if you are yelling the words of whatever, then that child actually interprets that as a negative experience, regardless of whether or not those words were not as harsh, such as do your laundry or take down your clothes or do the dishes, those sorts of things. If they are yelled to an extreme, especially at a child at a young age, then it does not help their brains develop in a positive way. And also to understand that we don't want people to grow up too fast. We don't want children to grow up too fast. I know that I have two nieces that I take care of. They're 13 and 10. And my greatest wish when I'm interacting with them is for them just to feel their age. I don't want them to feel older. I don't want them to feel younger or being patronized at. I want them to feel as a 10 and 13-year-old experiencing life in a way that is positive and developmental for them. I know that Adrian may have some stories to share at the end, so we're going to share, keep some of those stories to ourselves. But if you have any questions or would like to say anything on any of these topics, you can unmute yourself and talk about it here today. So also, when we're talking about coping skills and we're talking about recovery in general, recovery is that we want to, it's a very positive experience in that you are trying to find equal footing. You're trying to find a way to function and to be an active member of your life and your family and of society. But in reality, sometimes it doesn't always work linearly. And this is what I mean, that even maladaptive coping skills are still coping skills. And I want to say that, meaning that even if there is a level of self-harm involved, even if there's a level of substance use involved, coping skills are coping skills. Now, your brain and your body have decided that it needs something, and you have decided to use a certain thing, then it is still coping with what is happening to you or what had happened to you. Now, that doesn't mean that it's healthy for you if it's maladaptive. It doesn't mean it's the best choice. But for some people, if they are only given 4 choices and 3 of them are bad or bad for them or unhealthy, then they're probably going to pick those unhealthy choices, which is why there are many different points that we can look at where if you have adverse childhood experiences, such as I had mentioned in the previous slide, there are so many ways that we can mitigate those risk factors. And we're going to be talking about some of those. So obviously age appropriate skills, making sure that that child is given age appropriate care. Mindfulness is a great thing as well, making sure that someone is able to meditate, able to be with themselves at once. Also accommodation, and I don't necessarily see this a lot when it comes to this kind of conversation, but I think that it is something to keep in mind that accommodation is a huge part of this experience. And accommodation, meaning that if someone has something that they need to be somehow changed or somehow morphed into a shorter version of it or a bite-sized version, then we can give that to them. So for example, if, accommodation could be, a doctor suggests going outside for a walk for an hour and that person can't do that, then walking for 30 minutes or 15 will still give them some of that benefit. So it's doing, and I've heard this before, and I think I'm going to, hear it again, is that anything is worth doing, even if it's bad or even if it's done poorly. Meaning that if you are at a state in your life where you can't do much, at least doing something helps you. So if you can't brush your teeth for 2 minutes, brush them for 30 seconds. And at the very least, you did brush your teeth. That's the harm reduction piece. That's the part that's saying, okay, there are so many parts that you should be doing or could be doing to better your health. But at the very least, do the things you can and then work on the rest later. And that's all you can do. I also want to talk about recovery coping skills. I actually typed in just recovery coping skills on YouTube, and there are so many videos and resources and professionals that are on here that can help you in a range of ways. There's someone who actually struggled with addiction and actually was deaf when or hard of hearing when they had done it, and it was something that they had a whole channel surrounded by recovery in the deaf community. So I just think it's interesting. I also think that it is very valid and that it is something that you can use in mind to keep moving and to keep growing. So there's that. And there are so many videos on it that you are bound to find something that you enjoy and that you can talk about readily. So also I do have a couple of other things for family member and recovery coping skills. So there is coping with family conflict. This is a big one. This is by Healthfully. I actually use them as a lot as a resource, and they talk about lots of different ways to deal with family conflict. They have all their resources at the bottom of the page below. So if you would like more about it, you can just visit it, go to the bottom of the page, and then go from there. There are definitely treatment options that they also give, how to cope, things like that, and they give useful advice for it. They also have videos on this site as well. So if you ever need something visual, that is something that they can do for you. From active addiction, I also think that people who are coping for active addiction is definitely part of that too. I actually, Genesis is a recovery center, and they talk about different ways to help people who are in recovery from active addiction. Now, this is obviously not extensive. There are many people that use many different things. I know people that when they're feeling hard or hard things are going on in their life, they just go for a run, and that's how they cope with things. So there are many different ways to do it. And if you have any coping skills that you would like, you can definitely put them in the chat below. So I also want to make sure, yeah, there we go, that we are going to be talking about guilt, because when it comes to someone who is in active addiction, when it comes to people who interact with someone who is in active addiction, we want to make sure that we are still giving time for this. And the reason I do this is because there's actually somewhat of a story that I wanted to share with this. My sister used to actually struggle with a substance use disorder and was in active addiction for a long time. And my life had actually changed quite a lot since then, because I had to also take on a parenting role for her two daughters that were not being taken care of by her. Now, obviously, there's a lot of guilt that she may have with this. There's a lot of resentment that other people may have. I have resentment in certain degrees because of this. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because guilt is always going to be a part of the process, regardless of what that looks like. But I also wanted to quickly talk about guilt and shame and how there is a difference, because there is a difference. And so here, essentially, they say, what is guilt and addiction? Guilt and addiction is when you feel remorse over a mistake that you made while under the influence of drugs. Shame and addiction is persistent self-loathing and a feeling that makes you feel inadequate and worthless. So I think that we can use these two definitions to sort of give us our ground for what guilt is. Oh, I have something here. Oh, awesome. Vanessa, thank you so much. A few coping skills that work for a person in recovery could be distraction, journaling, calling a friend, and going for a walk. So those are all great things. Thank you so much, Vanessa. So yes, we have some coping skills there, so I appreciate that. And when we're talking about guilt, especially after everything, after a person who has been in active addiction is no longer in active addiction, there are many different areas that we can look at here. And because guilt is something that helps people make up for that, or helps people rekindle those relationships, we're going to be talking about refostering the relationship, actually, I believe in the next slide. But there is a difference between guilt and there's a difference between shame. Shame is something that is much more internalized, and it is something that can actually drive others to want to be users again, or to use or engage in substance use again. So we wouldn't want that. We don't want relapses necessarily, but when people acknowledge their guilt, it is a part of the recovery process. So and I think that a lot of the time, especially Adrian was going to talk on this when it talks about drug use or being in active addiction and having children at the same time, is that what is that guilt? And I know that my sister herself had said that it was because she feels guilty about not giving a safe space for her children, about not being given the space to help with her children. And I thought that was something that was really interesting as well. And I didn't really think about that safety is something that is owed to children, especially when we're the ones who brought them here. So how do we mitigate it getting in the way? Well, the first thing is that we turn to our coping skills, which is something that a couple of people have put in the chat, but also something that is something that people can engage in as well. Coping skills in that, right, can also mean, excuse me, had lunch, therapy, as well as any forms of support groups and things like that, which is something we'll be talking about, actually, I believe, in the next slide. So how do we deal with it? There are many different ways that we can deal with it. We can turn to our coping skills. But I also think, too, is that there is a difference between guilt and shame, but also a difference between taking full responsibility for everything and just trying to make up for things or refostering things. So especially when someone who has a lot of family or has a lot of people that they feel they owe things to, it's not that you are responsible for every part of that process. It's that initiating that may be part of your role, but you're not responsible for everything. And it is that you cannot grab onto every part of someone else's recovery, and you cannot grab onto every part of someone else's feelings. You are the one in recovery. You're the one feeling these things, meaning that you can act in a way that hopefully is healthy and and plentiful and refosters that relationship, but it doesn't always happen that way. And also being comfortable with the inconsistencies of what you wanted in your life versus what actually happened will also help with some of that guilt. The 3 C's we're actually going to be talking about on the next slide, so I'm just going to keep that there. Once again, if you have anything, you can definitely put it in the chat. I believe that we talked about, oh, I may have put it in the other slide. So there was a link for the 3 C's that I thought was really interesting. And that is, give me a second, my apologies. I cannot control it. I cannot cure it. I can't make up for it. I'm sorry, I can't find the 3 C's right now. But essentially, this was part of a process as well. Maybe it was this one. Oh, I guess it wasn't. All right. So essentially, we're going to be moving on and moving forward. Gotta get full screen again. So refostering the relationship. This is something that guilt may also be a part of. And what does this look like? Well, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean extending hands. It can mean looking through relationships that you may have had in the past and understanding what that looks like, but also knowing that what was in the past cannot happen in the present because you were 2 different people outside of that. You are 2 different people outside of what that looks like. And also understanding that if it's a child who has been interacting with someone who is in recovery or a child in recovery from their parents' active addiction, it's understanding that they have lived a life that a person who was in active addiction may not be aware of, that the parenting that may happen, the idea of it, the constant worrying is different now. All of that is different now. And that there is a different level of worry that may happen in a child, especially with a child who is a child of a parent in active addiction. Now, there are many different ways that we can talk about this. And there was a story that I wanted Adrian to share, but essentially it was that this recovery is not just yours, it is everyone who has been affected by active addiction and mental health disorders and substance use disorders. It is that everyone is included in this process, and that means refostering relationships is part of that process. Now, also, there are many places that we can look here, but there is one that I sort of wanted to look at with everyone. It's Children of Parents with Addiction. And here is a really cut and dry guide to looking at this and looking at the long-term effects as well. Children of parents who have substance abuse show higher rates of anxiety, depression, oppositional behavior, conduct problems, and aggressive behavior. They also tend to display lower rates of self-esteem and social competence. So that is something to keep in mind. And that is something that I think is good to know. And for that, we're also going to be talking about resources in Central Jersey. So that is actually where a lot of the resources that we're talking about will actually come to fruition, and you'll see what they are. So also mitigating factors for this and mitigating factors for helping refoster that relationship in the meantime, making sure that if you're trying to refoster something with a child who may have had to take care of their siblings, that may have had to have those influences in their lives, then it's understanding that it is not a linear process, that those children are going to be weary, they're going to be weird, there's going to be a different sort of dance that happens because you don't know them anymore and they don't know you anymore. You are 2 different people outside of it. And honestly, children and families will just want the person in active addiction to get help. And that is just the reality. They just want them to get help. They just want them to be better, right? But at the same time, it can be really hard for people to have those sorts of responses. And also to understand that that child may be very weary because of the actions of parents that have been a pattern and are no longer a pattern. So that interaction is weird. Adrian, was there anything that you wanted to add to this?
You have touched on so many things that you and I have discussed in the past, and oddly enough, I just got done. That's why I wasn't on the screen. I had to pick up my younger daughter at school, and as I'm sitting in the parking lot waiting, I'm thinking that right there is changed. Changed behavior. There was an anxiety there for such a long time of, even early on in my journey in recovery, there was this fear of, is mom going to pick me up? And the school was so, I think I even mentioned this to you before, the school was so tolerant and patient in allowing her to go to the office every single day and saying, mom, you remember to pick me up, right? And then eventually the fear just started to go away. And now it's like second nature. She just knows that I'm going to be there. But that had to, that trust had to come back again. That fear had to start to go away. And I guess that's something that I never even thought about, that's in her toolkit, that she shouldn't have had to have worried about something like that. But she did. And I know you touched on my older daughter not wanting to go to school because she was fearful. When I was in active addiction, she was fearful of what is going to happen to and I have one crawling up the steps right now. What is going to happen to my sister when I hate it here? I don't want to be in this house, but I don't want to leave because I lose control when I leave. And proud mom moment. I consider myself in recovery. My husband considers himself in recovery. My oldest daughter found her journey in recovery through, Nar-Anon, Narateen. And it's a beautiful thing to hear her say, I'm in recovery now too, because there were so many things that we thought, oh, well, we're good. We're in recovery now. She should just see it. She's good. And it wasn't until years into our recovery that she started to go through her own depression and things started to surface that she never addressed. And luckily she found her own path and, in her own form of recovery. And, it's a really neat thing to be on that same journey. Even I know I'm bouncing around, but even the guilt, when you spoke about guilt, I feel like myself as the person with substance use disorder, there are so many times that because I still deal with guilt, I kind of let things go, or I let people, I don't want to say walk on me, but I let certain people say certain things because I feel like that is the way that they need to process it. Like I'm allowed to be the punching bag because I caused this, and that's just, they're allowed to say whatever they want to me. But now with like my daughter working her program, we're finding common ground. We're finding ways that we can talk to each other and process things without it building resentments or it getting ugly. And there's just so much I wanted to talk about on this. It's just you did an awesome job with covering everything that I wanted to talk about.
Thank you. And obviously the input that we have here is that, Adrian, your story is, I would say, inspiring, but not necessarily unique, in that this story happens all the time across America and across the world. And it's learning how to use that story and inspire others to say, hey, we're pretty average, like the world is this, but that's okay. And we did it, meaning that it is very possible for other people to do this, that recovery and, refostering a relationship with things that were hard for us is completely possible. All of those aspects to being a person who is better off, who is more enlightened, who is in recovery is possible. all of that is very feasible. Hard work, but feasible. And the way that we've talked about that is just so interesting. And thank you for sharing, Adrian. I know that it's not always something that people are proud of, but it is something that's part of our journeys. So anything else you would like to add before we talk about the resources?
No, I think you hit on our lives on to a T. Everything that we have gone through, everything that we are going through. It's a process. We're still going through things. I have my oldest daughter lives with my parents. So when she comes here, it's awkward and uncomfortable at times because she doesn't get to see the everyday life of our recovery. So, if it's a Friday night and she's spending the night, and my husband and we fall asleep on the couch at 9 o'clock at night after a long work week, there's still that feeling of, are they passed out or are they just tired from work, and that's something that we still have to because it still triggers something in her, whereas my other children don't. Yes, they see you. um they they it's just natural to them. My middle child, she deals with me working in the field, so she sees that part of what life used to be like and what it is now. Even I think there was one other thing. Oh, yeah, just the uncomfortable conversations now, and just trying to patch the family together. And like you said, it's not unique. It's a family disease, and families in recovery this is what they go through. This repairing stage.
Yeah, definitely. And I also, I love hearing Salvatore in the background. What I also appreciate is that when you're looking at this here too, is that a person in active addiction is also a person, right? So, even when they are not necessarily their actions, I don't want to say they're separate from them, but their actions were influenced by a lot more than just them. And I think that a lot of people tend to forget that when they are trying to refoster that relationship, that you did this and you did that, and yes, you did, and there's nothing to change that, but also that person, as a whole person, holistically, there are so many other parts outside of their active addiction, and on taking in that whole person, I think, is also a huge part of refostering that relationship. So there are so many different parts to it. And obviously, I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means, but just to know that it's not unique and it's something that happens all the time, and it's feasible and workable. So thank you for that, Adrian. So we're going to be talking about resources, and this is where I had put I can't seem to find Naranon on here, but I will be putting that resource below because it is something that has helped so many people, so many teens as well, to understand their process in being the child of a person in active addiction. My apologies for not having it on here. Oh no, it is here. Okay, here it is. All right, so this is something that is the 3 C's. This is not necessarily the teenage program, I don't think, but they do have different programs here that you can go through. And I think that is really great. So this is something that I really appreciate as part of this process as recovery. I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. And I know that this is something that is so relevant to right now because it talks about family members and friends who were close to someone who was in active addiction and how they can move forward and help that person in active addiction, but also help themselves. So I think that it's also a process that is less daunting when you have a structure to it, when you go to professionals that understand what emotions people would be feeling when they're going through this. There are many resources in Mercer County. This is a recovery specialist services resource. It's if it loads. And then here is the Al-Anon one, and this NJPN, which is the Sharing the Hope Family Services, Family Advocates. They have so many things. Al-Anon, Alateen was also here. So just in case anyone who has a teenager would like to be part of this process, there are nothing but good things I've heard from this. So that's pretty great as well. Recovery Advocates. This is specifically the one in Hamilton. So you'll be able to find something in Mercer County, which is pretty great. And also
It
mercercouncil.org. Yes.
not to cut in, but it
Oh,
looks like actually Cecilia is on here. So I don't know if you want her to say anything, or
if she wants to.
I know
I
that
don't
she
know if
kind of helped contribute to some of the information. Yeah, some of the things that I may have forgotten or chose, just an oversight. So she was able to kind of put her part in, and it's just a beautiful thing to you mentioned Naranon and Narateen and Al-Anon and all that, those support groups, and to see that she takes part in that is it's an awesome thing. It's like that.
there we go.
I guess all those fears of me thinking, oh, she doesn't understand, she doesn't know why this happened, I hope she doesn't think it's her fault, I hope this, and she's starting to learn and process it, her way, and pretty cool.
Yeah, to be given the tools for that, I think is such a blessing to have that. But Cecilia, if you want to, you're more than welcome to unmute and talk. But I don't know if you're away from your oh, hello.
Hi. Everything my mom said was perfect. Couldn't have gotten it better. And yes, addiction is a journey, and recovery is even harder, I think, in my opinion, because it's not only with the addict, it's with everybody around them. But I just wanted to say that I am proud of my mom and dad for all that they've done, and finding the help that they need, and also giving me my space and letting me find my own journey in recovery. Recovery is amazing, and I am currently in Narateen and Alateen, and they're a little separate, like they're different, but they're all for the same purpose. So if anybody needs any information about it, I have only done virtual meetings, so I could always give like the emails to the virtual meetings and like the passcodes and Zoom calls and all that. So yeah, thanks for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing, Cecilia. It's always appreciated. And honestly, just, being so brave and sharing your story, but also just like understanding that this is something that a lot of people go through, and your story is not unique, but in its own right it is, because it's you who's speaking. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and all of that. So it is always appreciated. And if anybody has anything to close on, you can put it in the chat, or anything to say, just unmute yourself and you can talk. Last resource is, does it surprise you that I put mercercouncil.org down there? Because we do have resources to a lot of different things. We have a lot of accolades in the chat, which is great. Cecilia, you are awesome, so thank you. And so if you are looking for anything more broad range for prevention services, or any programs such as we do, such as ORP, which is something Adrian Petta is a part of, you can obviously look there and find our information in case you have more questions. Just to close out, I always end on quotes because I feel that they're the most necessary, and two, there are just times where they say things better than I ever could. And I don't know, people are quoted for a reason. So first thing, your past is not your potential. That was something that Adrian had said had helped her through her time in high school, and something that her guidance counselor had always said to her. And also, this is something that we say at the Mercer Council, and this is something that I definitely believe is, thank you, Cecilia, that's awesome. Yes, good. So the last thing I have here is, so the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is human connection, which in reality is very true, especially with someone who's trying to recover and going through that process with their family. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time and attention. If there is anything that you would like to learn more of, just let us know and tune in next week.